Naam, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allahu Jalla wa ala, by His grace and His fadl, allow us to come together again for the Fajr Club, which is an initiative that was put together by our brother and our sheikh, our teacher, brother Aqil Ingram, Dr. Abdul Haq Baker, and myself, Nafis Abu Zaid. Alhamdulillah, where we discuss and touch on some of the various different topics, hot topics, if you will, that has been plaguing different Muslim communities with and without the states, that we would like to bring to the forefront as the discussion. But we would like to apologize for one of our co-host, who is Dr. Abdul Haq Baker, who would like us to extend his greetings to you guys and his apologies, but he will be back on, inshallah ta'ala, next week with us. So we will be going. He told us to go without him, but he will be back. So inshallah ta'ala, he won't be with us today, unfortunately. What we're doing is we're following a framework that he had laid out, that he has put together, um, dealing with the four stages of the cognitive model. We dealt with the first stage. Well, alhamdulillah, I think we spent some time on that. And we decided to move to the second stage. And the second stage of the model talks about this is where the abstract knowledge can be seen the most. So we titled this particular talk, The Eager Youth Has Become a Scholar. Not because the youth intentionally wants to contend with the scholar. Not 9 times out of 10 is due to that eagerness and that love for the deen that allows them to pretty much move in haste and not with much wisdom, that cause them to make a lot of blunders, which in turns begin to contend with the scholar without even knowing it. So that's what we want to talk about today, inshallah. You have anything to say to them, brother Akil?
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah ma ba'd. Firstly, we ask Allah, tabarak wa ta'ala, the best of the exalted, to continue to fortify our brother, Dr. Abdul Haq Baker, until he returns with us, bi'unillahi ta'ala, with the aid of Allah, the exalted. And secondly, just to kind of frame and seek the discussion, we should know what we're talking about, because we're speaking to the acquisition of knowledge. So in that, I thought it prudent to provide some definition and context for what knowledge is, and then tell a brief story. When we speak to the term ilm, or we speak to the term knowledge, and we state it this way in just an open and unrestricted sense, then what we mean by that is legislative knowledge, what is called al-ilm al-shar'i. And by legislative knowledge, we mean the knowledge of the Quran and the Sunnah, and that which assists us in understanding and practicing the Quran and the Sunnah. This is the type of knowledge that we'll primarily be speaking about here today. As for what knowledge is, then we can find varying definitions of knowledge. From the most simplistic of them and forward of them is naqidul jahl, the opposite of ignorance. We find others stating that knowledge is ma'rifatul huda bidalilihi, that knowledge is to be cognizant of guidance along with the evidence for that guidance. We find others saying that it is hifdhun nusus bima'aniha sahiha. It is memorization of the text here being Quran and Sunnah, memorization of the text along with its correct meanings. Yet others, they will say, إِدْرَاكَ الشَّيْءِ عَلَى مَا هُوَ عَلَيْهِ إِدْرَاكٍ جَازِمًا. Others will say it is to perceive a thing with adamant perception, and your perception of that thing is actually in accordance with reality. So when your perception meets reality, then that is knowledge. And when your perception of a thing does not meet reality, then this is what we call ignorance, or this is what we called jahl. So after sharing those definitions and in that context for the type of knowledge that we're going to be speaking about, understanding that we're speaking to the zeal of the Muslim when the Muslim first embraced the faith of Islam, when the Muslim first comes into practicing the faith of Islam, if they've been Muslim for some time, even sometimes when the Muslim comes into new data, when the Muslim comes into new information that the Muslim was not privy to prior, even if the individual is a Muslim for some time. And to speak to this, I'm going to tell you a brief story. So back in the 90s, many of us that were striving for the orthodoxy of the faith, many of us that were striving to be upon the Sunnah of Islam, we learned about the Sunnah. We're exposed to the Sunnah, not only by way of, but primarily by way of a Sheikh Muhammad Nasiruddin Al-Albani, may Allah bestow mercy upon his soul, and his students who were scholars in their own right. Many of them from the region of Jordan, and they would come here often in the 90s, and through different seminars and visiting different masajid, and we had numerous opportunities to be around them in their presence and learn from them. And we were learning about the orthodoxy of the faith by way of this at that time, if this makes sense. Primarily, not in total. So many of us during this time, the way that we learned how to pray, by way of Al-Albani's book, may Allah bestow mercy upon his soul, Sifatu Salat al-Nabi, the description of the Prophet's prayer, as though you see it, as though you can see it with your own eyes. Many of us learned how to pray by way of this book. May Allah bestow mercy upon the soul of the Sheikh, and continue to reward him for all that he did for Islam and the Muslims.
No.
So with this, we understood that this was the way to pray and the way to understand all of the issues as it relates to prayer in our zeal. And we just thought, because the book, anybody that goes through the book, we still encourage people to benefit from the book. It is a very detailed account, and it is very close in detailing the Sunnah of the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and what he did, when, and how in each place of the prayer from beginning to end. So you read that, and you're brand new, and you're like, this is it. There's nothing else.
Right.
Someone doing something else. Why are you doing something other than this?
No.
Says,
No.
right? It's
No.
in the book, right?
No.
So one of the things that we learned from this time period was the view of Al-Albani rahimahullah ta'ala at that time, the prohibition of offering a second congregational prayer. The prohibition of offering a second congregational prayer. So when we came across this, when we would see other people doing a second congregational prayer, we understood that they were wrong. We understood even that they were upon innovation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because of offering a second congregational prayer. And may Allah forgive us, in our youth, in our zeal at that time, if it was time for us to pray, the congregation had already been established, we're going to pray individually. So if someone then would ask us to pray along with us, or for us to pray with them, we would not only not pray with them, we might be a little rigid with them with regard to that, and it just wasn't right. But in the learning process, as we grow, you then learn, as you learn about jurisprudence, as you learn about the subject called fiqh, then you learn that there is a difference of opinion among scholarship on the issue, and there is another valid view on the issue. And then further, you'll learn that it actually represents the majority of scholarship historically. So you come into that, right? And then later on, some years down the line, I'm in Medina, and it just so happened to be, and we'll mention some of these names for sake of exposure, and just because it's our personal experience, right? But we come to Medina, we're there, and it just so happened that Sheikh Rabi' ibn Hadi al-Madkhali, may Allah preserve him, he was visiting from Mecca to Medina, and he was in his neighborhood where he used to live, because that house where he lived at was still in the family. So we went to his what used to be his local masjid in his neighborhood in Medina where he used to live, waiting for him to come. He was going to talk to us, deliver a lecture. Small masjid. Masjid is packed with tulab, thus and so. We're waiting a couple hours, right? And it's it's so far gone that we had already prayed, right? We had already prayed. Asr into Maghrib, we pray Maghrib, we established the congregation. So then Sheikh Rabi' comes in, and he's accompanied by Sheikh Muhammad ibn Hadi al-Malkhali. May Allah preserve him.
Mm.
They come in together, and then what do? They establish a second congregation. Okay, so that was eye opening at the time based on what we had learned previous. So we'll take it a step further. Not only that, then there were, not just the two of them, there were others that prayed along with them as well.
Mm-hmm.
And there were others who had already prayed who joined in prayer with them as well. Right? So you learn and you get into some things. So then you come across the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where it was the Asr prayer. They had established the prayer, and another Sahabi companion comes, and he's offering his Asr prayer. The Prophet ﷺ states, who will give this man sadaqah? Who will give this man charity? Who will pray along with him? That second congregation with someone who had already prayed the congregation previous.
No.
Okay. Last part of this story. You then come into the understanding that where this all is coming from historically, and the way that it used to be for a very long time within Islamic history, all the way up until about 100 years ago, would be that if you were going to the masjid to pray, you would only pray with the person that was trained under the madhab that you ascribe to, that was trained under the approach to law that you ascribe to, and you would not pray behind someone else who ascribes to another approach to law, right? We call them the four madhahib, or the four schools of law. So historically, this created a degree of division amongst the Muslims and a lack of unity. And it was to the point that, again, you would wait till the person who ascribed to your law would come to lead the prayer and pray with that person. So we then understand that Al-Albani rahimahullah, may Allah restore mercy upon us, and others among scholarship weren't necessarily against the second congregation in and of itself. It was the person who intentionally does not pray the first congregation, waiting to pray in a different congregation and separating the Muslims for this reason. It was an issue of unity. And it was to the degree that even at, and this is something we learned from Sheikh Salih al-Husayyin, rahimahullah, may Allah restore mercy upon the soul, our time with him in Mecca, that when he explained it to us, the history of Masjid al-Haram, that it used to be that in Masjid al-Haram, for every salah, there will be 4 different imams in accordance with their approach to law. And you would only pray behind the imam that followed your approach to law. But approximately 100 years ago or so, the decision was made at Masjid al-Haram for there to be 1 imam for each salah, for sake of the unity of the Muslims. And then this began to filter out throughout the world because everyone goes to Mecca and many people look to the scholarship that is there, right? Everybody's going there from all around the world. So then once they started doing that, and then it filtered back out throughout the world where we have 1 imam for each prayer. So I say this just to say that in our zeal, in the beginning, having a piece of information, we took a particular posture. But then we learned that it's broader. Then we learned there's context. Then we learned there's a history to it. And then we learned the position that we originally thought was a position was actually for the sake of unity and not just for the sake of not praying a second congregation alone by itself. So we say this just to offer some color.
So alhamdulillah, that was beautiful, man. I even got some gems from that because I can remember Sheikh Al-Albani's book being the book, especially back then in the 90s.
Me too, absolutely.
Yeah, right. So like if you didn't have that book or you didn't pray according to that, you definitely was off it, And that's how our minds was trained to think that, okay, if this guy is praying, then how you praying? Are you praying according to Sheikh Al-Albani's book, Sifat Salat Nabi? You know what I'm saying? Aqil, you must be doing an innovation, and that's normally how it pretty much was. And it's interesting in your story, though. It just showed you, like how you mentioned at the end, to tie everything back. It's how we was getting data, and then we had to broaden that data had to become broadened because we took a certain posture, a certain understanding due to the data that we only had. And that's normally what I get from the second stage. It's just that you might be exposed to something, but that might not be the whole full picture, right? And just because you don't have the full picture, you might make a stance on something, and then you might begin to base your allegiance or disallegiance based upon that stance. And your world become a little bit narrow because you don't have the full view. And I think that's a lot of times deal with our, being, our youth. When I say youth here, I'm not talking about teenagers. You know what I'm saying? I'm still just talking about Shabab. You know what I mean? And for those who don't know, Shabab can last up from the teenager years all the way up until you before you become a full adult, which is the,
right. Shabab being in the years of our youth, right?
Exactly. So, and that's what I'm saying. So we be so eager in that stage, like you saying, we're so eager in that stage. So whatever piece of information we learn, we pretty much judge everyone else by that. We judge everyone, even though that's not the full spectrum. Like you said, come to find out, it was more about unity than it was before then, because we didn't know a lot about fiqh. I know for me, the information we was coming across, we had the Latatul Rasul, Sheikh Muhammad Wahad's book that was circulating amongst us, and then we had Sifat Salat Nabi from Sheikh Al-Albani. And we didn't really know a little bit too much about fiqh. And now, as I look back in hindsight, I realize that there is not a position in the prayer except that there is ikhtilaf concerning it. I didn't know that back then. Coming into Islam then, I didn't know that there was a difference of opinion for each particular part of the actual prayer, right? And also, I remember one story myself is that we used to go by this African masjid and they would pray a certain time, right? But they will call the adhan and the iqama kind of different, right? So some of the brothers felt as though like, oh, this, and it was circulate. Don't go to that masjid. I think they're applying innovation. I don't know what they're doing. They call the adhan and the iqama, kind of funny. Yeah, so they might be ahl bidah, right? And this was normally what is understood in the masjid. I mean, in the area, in our region in Philly, that masjid was upon bidah. Only because of the fact we weren't aware that you can call the adhan different ways. We weren't aware that you can actually call the iqama different ways, right? But because of what we knew from the information that we had, if anyone went against that, they was upon innovation. Nah, mashallah. The Muslim chapter, inshallah ta'ala, we're going to save anyone who got questions. We will save your questions before the end of this. And inshallah ta'ala, Brother Aqil, we'll try to put it up on the screen and see if we can go ahead and answer those questions for you guys. Inshallah. Tight. Now, yeah, Aqil, got anything more for us?
Well, a point to mention as well, in the entry level stages of development of the new Muslim, the new practicing Muslim, or the Muslim coming into new data, is that there are stages to our knowledge, and the stages that we kind of go through. I'm going to mention this from two different perspectives.
Okay.
From one stage, it deals with the depth of the information itself. And another stage deals with, or another series of stages deal with how we are processing and internalizing our growth as we go through those stages of depth of information. So with regards to the depth of information, we can simply say that there are three stages. There's knowledge, there's understanding, and there's wisdom. At the stage of knowledge, we have the raw data. We have raw information. Hopefully, the data we have is accurate data, but we have raw data. And just because we have that data, we're going to mention that there's a text. You're going to hear people quoting a lot, right? Quoting a verse, quoting a hadith, a prophetic tradition, quoting a statement from the ancient Muslims, quoting a statement of scholarship, pulling down an article off the internet, or whatever it is, right? Now screenshotting a quote or copying and pasting something, and it's just raw data, and they think that is the end all be all. Okay,
Nice point.
but that's really just the first stage of knowledge, the raw data. Then you come into the second stage of that data, and it's understanding. You realize that there is a context to this data. And once you have understanding of it, you are then learning how to apply the data that you have. Often, when we're at the first stage and we just have raw data without understanding in the context of how to apply it, we don't realize it. We insert our own understanding with regard to how we're going to apply that data. And because we have the data, that is now the evidence of how we're applying it. And it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. We have context to the book and the sunnah. The goal with the Quran and the sunnah is to strive to arrive at what Allah intended by what he said. To strive to arrive at what the Prophet ﷺ intended by what he said. This is why we are utilizing the understanding and the methodology of the Salaf, of the ancients, so that we can get as close as possible to what they intended by what they said. This is why we have certain sciences that are in place. For example, usul al-tafsir, right? For example, the science of exegesis, let us call it, right? Hermeneutics, as it were. This is why we have usul al-fiqh. This is why we have legal theory. This is why we have the different fields of study within the Arabic language, for example. They're supporting us to get to the goal of what Allah and His Messenger intended by what He said, right? So there's context, and we can't just insert ourselves in that context.
No.
So you get to understanding, and then once you have understanding, eventually you grow further, and you realize that there's more than just context. There's more to this than just how to apply this. Eventually, you get to the final stage, and that's the stage of wisdom. That's the stage of wisdom, where now you're beyond the data. You have the data. You're beyond the understanding. You have the context and how to do it. Now you're in the space of when is the most appropriate time to do this? To what extent do I do this? Who exactly does this apply to? Who does it not apply to? Right? That's wisdom. Right? What is necessary and what can we forego? What is most appropriate for what's in front of us at present? That's the latter stage, and then you get into wisdom, right? So this is the process of knowledge itself that one eventually will go through. But while you're going through this process of knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, then internally you go through certain stages within yourself at the spiritual level. And what you'll find that you go through is the first stage of knowledge that you'll go through internally and spiritually is arrogance. You think now because you know something else that other people don't know, ergo, you are now better than the other. Hitherto, you are now on a higher level than the other. You now have access that others don't have access to. So now you are of an elitist status. So we see people operating in this space, and really they're coloring themselves as being in the first stage of knowledge. So the first stage is arrogance. And not all, but many people go through this. And to be quite honest, an interesting point in reading the biographical account of Shokani, may Allah bestow mercy upon his soul. And you find something interesting. You'll find that people who never had, or people who didn't have much with regards to societal status, that now when we come into knowledge, sometimes when we come into provisions, sometimes when we come into social status, now because we've never experienced it before, now we take that and we hold on to it, and we want to utilize that to propel ourselves forward and upward to that which we didn't have prior to, right?
No.
And again, this expresses itself in the form of arrogance. And then there are others that you'll find that they had some things before. Maybe they had some societal status, or maybe they had some form of wealth and provisions, or maybe they had, if not this knowledge, they had other knowledges before. So having that type of a thing is not new to them. So when they come into it, it doesn't impact them in a way of arrogance, right?
Mm.
They understand that it has a utility and they utilize it for its utility. So again, the first stage internally and spiritually is arrogance.
Mm.
Then the second stage after that is humility. As you go further in your understanding and your practice of the faith of Islam, you become humble, right? The more you learn, the more it humbles you. And then eventually, and this is interesting, the final internal spiritual stage of knowledge is ignorance. You realize you've learned enough that you realize you don't know. You've learned enough that you realize knowledge is a sea without any shores. Regardless of how far you go into it, you're never going to see the end of it, right? Allah's alim, Allah's omniscient. His knowledge is eternal. You're never going to get to the end of that. And you can only have from it that which he grants you of it, right? So then you just realize that you're ignorant and you remain at that point completely open-minded and completely humble. And you become a life learner, always willing to grow and improve. And we apologize for being long-winded with that, but we want to hear what you have to say as well, Nafis.
No, 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 no. I agree with everything you said. Honestly, for the listeners who are listening to what you're saying, you have laid out some beautiful works. And for those of you thinking that we're not touching on the illnesses, sometimes we forget as he just got finished laying down those stages, which is very important because we all can identify at some level within our coming into Islam, experience some of this stuff. I know me for certain, I can identify me going through that first stage of just raw data and being still stuck in that stage and sometimes convincing myself that I moved to the second stage, which I didn't, which in terms cause a lot of division in that first stage of raw data because if you're not understanding that you're being arrogant, you understand, and if you're not accustomed to having certain things and you get a status now because you can quote this information because people are looking at you different now because you have a good memory and so forth, and now they're putting you in a leadership role when you may do not have understanding and you can't contextualize that information because you didn't reach the second stage nor the third, right? So you don't have humility when you place in that leadership role in advance before you actually develop to be in that role, you cause more harm. And this brings about illnesses. So for those who don't think that we're touching on illnesses, we are. We're just not touching on the way that you wanted to touch on it because you got to pay attention to what he was saying. That really, a lot of times, ignorance is our number one killer. And because this second stage is so vital, when we in this stage, we normally tend to cause a lot of problems for other people, for ourselves, because we don't know how to properly apply anything. And just to, go back a little bit for myself, I remember when I came into Islam, everything I read, it was like a sponge. I was sucking up the information. But what I wanted to do as I got the information, I wanted to apply it right then and there. Whether I understood it or not, it just that, okay, this is what we're supposed to be doing. So if I read that the Prophet ﷺ did something, then I wanted to do it. If I read that the companions were doing something, I remember one time we was in a yard, it was me and it was about five of the brothers. And I was sharing with them an hadith of the companions and how they would kiss each other on the forehead and say they love for the sake of Allah. So I had everyone in turn does that. So I started off, I kissed one brother in his head, and then I told him I love him for the sake of Allah, and then he turned to kiss someone. And it was in that, you might say, in our innocent stage there, that we were so eager just to apply everything that we had, right? But we really didn't understand all the context, so it wasn't no coloring there. You understand? So I really didn't know when you're supposed to do this. And then as I grew within my Islam, in my deen, I realized there was a lot of things I was left off on. Like, no, you couldn't do that. As you was explaining before, when you got over there to Medina, and you see that there was a second congregation that could be established. There were other things that you can actually learn. So for me, brothers and sisters, what I'm saying is that we have to understand that in that first beginning stage, we are ignorant, even if we are exposed to raw data. And that ignorance is more harmful. I'm going to bring a quote here at this point, and I already talked to Brother Aqil about it. It's a quote from Ibn Qayyim al-Jaziyah, rahmatullah ta'ala alayh, in his famous Nuniyah. He mentions about the a line of poetry that he gives, and when he explains, he says, وَالْجَهْلُ قَاتِلٌ. He says, وَالْجَهْلُ دَاءٌ قَاتِلٌ وشفاؤه أمران في التركيب متفقان نص من القرآن أو من سنة. And then he says, وَطَبِيبُ ذَاكَ الْآلِمُ الرَّبَّانِ. And these two lines of poetry, Ibn Qayyim lays out the illness for those who wants to, understand what the illness is, and then he lays out the cure. So he says the illness. He first starts off by saying that ignorance is a deadly disease, right? And he says the cure for it is in two affairs, which are arranged in order, meaning agreed upon, mutafiqani, right? And he says, Nasun, one of those two affairs is going to be a Nas, the text from the Quran, and the second text will be the Sunnah. But then he says the one who's going to apply those, administrate those, if you will, those cures, then it will be none other than the Tabib. The doctor here, he's talking about the Rabbani, the Alimul Rabbani, right? Here, knowing that the scholars of Alimul Rabbani. Shaykh Taymiyyah, rahmatullah ta'ala, comment on this line of poetry. He explained that he says that not every scholar is going to benefit you. It's a specific scholar here that Ibn Qayyim is alluding to. And that's the Alim Rabbani, because the Alim Rabbani is the one he says is Hakim. He is Hakim in his way of teaching, okay, in his way of disseminating the knowledge, where he's Yurab bin Nas, what I mean? He actually cultivate the people on the smaller issues before developing to the larger issues. And a lot of y'all, if y'all be honest with yourself right now, how many of us skip past A, B, and C, and we already on D, E, F. We're already up here. How many of us in multiple parts or facets in our lives within the deen? How do we find ourselves doing that? We're just like, we move like kids, and we don't have the preliminaries down, and that causes a lot of problems, which brings about those illnesses. So that's what I wanted to bring a little bit earlier, inshallah. I just summarized what the Sheikh was saying pretty much about it.
May Allah reward you ever so kindly. And along with this, I believe that we should submit that in no way, in no form, are we discouraging that zeal that a person has when they come into the faith, come into practice, come into new information, because this is something that is valued within our faith practice. Our Lord, the Best and the Exalted, He has mentioned يَرْفَعِ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مِنْكُمْ وَالَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْعِلْمَ دَرَجَاتٍ. Allah has raised in rank those amongst you who have faith and those amongst you who possess knowledge. And what is interesting here is that we see that those who have faith and knowledge, they both have rank with Allah. So those who have faith, they have a rank. And then those who have knowledge have a higher rank than those who have faith, because of the fact that those who have faith may not necessarily have knowledge, but those who have knowledge have faith and knowledge. So it gives them a bit of a higher rank. And that ranking is in this life as well as in the hereafter. It is tangible and it is non-tangible, meaning that Allah will raise the stature of such an individual who possesses this knowledge in this life, and Allah will raise the rank of this person actually in physicality in paradise. And we find that it is tangible and non-tangible as well. We also know that our Lord, the mighty and the majestic, has stated, "Shahid Allahu innahu la ilaha illa huwa wa malaikatu wa ulul ilm qa'iman bil qist. La ilaha illa huwa al-aziz al-hakim." That our Lord states that He bears witness that there is none who has the right to be worshipped other than Him, and the angels bear this witness, and those who possess knowledge also bear this witness. They uphold that with justice, and there is none who has the right to be worshipped except Him who is mighty and wise. So we see here that our Lord gives the testimony to the highest thing that can be testified to, the purpose of life, that there's none to be worshiped, there's none who has a right to be worshiped other than him. And then he mentions the highest of the creation to bear witness to this highest testimony, the angels. And then Allah mentions alongside the angels those who possess knowledge. So there's no debate on the virtue of those who possess knowledge. And there's no debate in the value of the having the motivation to seek this out. For the person that seeks it out, there's paradise for this person. من سلك طريقا يلتمس فيه علما سهل الله له به طريقا إلى الجنة. Whoever traverses a path seeking knowledge therein, Allah will facilitate a path for him to paradise. And this is as the Prophet ﷺ has stated it. And what's interesting here, and this is what we want to begin to highlight, it's not so much about how far you get on that path. It's not so much about how much data you have acquired. It's just that you are on the path in order to seek that information, in order to seek that knowledge. So long as you're on that path, then a path will be facilitated to you to paradise. That's the goal, to get to paradise. And the way to get to paradise here is by way of just being on that path. That's it. Be on the path. And then whatever Allah allows you to get in this life, so be it. So long as you have sincerity, you may get to a high level of paradise than a person that has more data than you, more information than you, more memorization than you, more reading than you. So what we're really getting at here is that what really would assist us in this stage in our development is understanding that knowledge by itself is not meant to be by itself, but rather the information we're coming into is meant to be accompanied with the adab of knowledge, with the epistemology of knowledge, with the manners and the morals, the conduct of knowledge. These two go together, and this becomes the guiding light. And believe it or not, it is actually the methodology of knowledge. It is actually the etiquette of knowledge that brings one into the space of being a disciple of knowledge or not, a talib ilm or not. This is what it is, not necessarily the information. To the point that Zakaria al-Anbari, may Allah bestow mercy upon his soul, he has a statement, and perhaps in my rhetoric here, he mentions ilmun bila adabin kanarin bila hatabin wa adabun bila ilmin kunurun bila jasadin. That knowledge without adab, knowledge without manners, is like having a fire without firewood to keep it going. And to have manners, to have etiquette without knowledge is like having a soul without the body.
MashaAllah, beautiful, beautiful. You had laid out a lot within the 3 times that you talked, alhamdulillah, and I think it was good because it was able to touch on some of the problems that we see in this stage, as well as some of the cures that can be used. And I know we have a lot of questions over here, so I'm going to start showing some of them in a minute, y'all. You guys, I'm going to put it up there so that we can start looking at some of those questions and try to get to them the best we can, inshallah ta'ala. I just want to make something very clear for a lot of the brothers. We did the first stage. The first stage was dealing with a lot of the newly converts, okay? We're on the second stage now of the framework of Dr. Haq Baker. So we're not really so much still on the new converts or the people who come into Islam. We're still on people who been Muslim, have had Shahada with them. However, they have a zeal at this point. Everything they got is like a sponge, and he's pretty much laying it out for us so that we can see what some of the pitfalls that we go through within this particular stage and some of the challenges that we face in regards to that. So, and I also wanted just to make it real clear to you guys, you have to understand that, and a lot of people, sometimes they are deluded in this way. When we look at people in leadership roles, we always have an opinion. We think that, okay, they're not suitable. That's the first thing that comes to our mind. This person isn't suitable. But in reality, we have to be honest with ourselves. What leadership role, if a person had a zeal for that role, if a person was a spark in that person, regardless of whether you knew it or not, and that person was studious to whatever degree, but they needed to be developed. That's what Brother Aqil was laying out for us. Knowledge itself is not going to get you there. It have to be some things accompanied with that knowledge. All the other things need to be associated with it. But the spark was still in that individual. You understand that in that leadership role. So for you to sit here and say, you know what, he's not suitable, he's going to cause more trouble, okay, then we need to work on how to make him become suitable. And that's some of the things that he was laying down to get to that second stage of understanding, to get to those certain things of having edit and etiquettes and so forth. So a lot of people don't have the zeal to want to be in the leadership role. All right. And I meet a lot of people like that, a lot of people who don't study, right? But they have something to say about everyone else. But they're really not in themselves. They don't have desire to do it. So instead of focusing on all of the blunders that the person in the leadership roles make, let's focus on offering dua and trying to get them to the proper understanding so that they can fulfill the role in its true manner to help out. That's just my 2 cents on it, inshallah. Tell you, I'm going to put up the first question. I'm going to go all the way back to the first question the brother had. I'll put it up here for us so that you can see it, Brother Aqil. I think this is it here.
Okay, so we see the question here saying from our dear brother, chaplain in Antigua, the Muslim chaplain, and we appreciate your service, my dear brother. He states here, Assalamu alaikum. If time permits, can you explain how the concept of taqleed, blind following, the danger of it with its negative connotation with respect to the stories that you are presenting? Okay, I'll take a crack at it, and I'll allow you to ducktail me, Nafis. May Allah preserve you. So, what is taqleed? What is what we call blind following? Well, blind following is to take the view of another person without having evidence or understanding the evidence for what you're asking about or for what you're being told. That's what blind following is. Because we know as a Muslim people, as a people who strive to submit our will to the will of the Creator, we submit our will to the will of the Creator by way of being aware of the legislative will of the Creator, by way of revelation, what He has informed us of His legislative will, because that's what revelation is. That's what the Quran is. That's what the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is. It is the legislative will of Allah. It is that which He wills us to do that He does not force us to do. It is that which He wills us to do that we have to make the choice of our own volition to do it, right? So we look to this as a source in order to know what it is that Allah wants from us so that we do it. We call that evidence. So sometimes though, sometimes we don't know the evidence, don't have access to the evidence, or because of our training or lack of training, we don't have the ability to understand the evidence even if it's presented to us. So we'll go to a person who we deem to be in that space that we are not in, and we will present it to them, or they tell us, and then we just go with it without knowing the evidences or those details. And this in and of itself is not necessarily anything wrong with that, although it orders us to do this. Ask the people of the remembrance if you do not have knowledge. And this is interesting, even if you don't have knowledge, and our Lord didn't say if you're ignorant, because it is possible that even those who have knowledge may not know a particular thing and may need to go to someone else about a particular thing in their field of expertise. And that's okay. Each one teach one. We all support one another in that way. Okay. Now that we understand this, sometimes though, we have some people that they will go as far as not even really wanting to know the legislative will of Allah, not even being concerned about the evidence. And they take a statement of a person who may quite well be academically qualified, a person that we may take to emulate in our faith practice and understanding, a person of scholarship, maybe even a person of righteousness, or person of scholarship and righteousness, perhaps, and then just take the statement and run with it. It can get worse than that, where a person may be presented with the legislative will of Allah. This is what Allah wills for us, right? We call it evidence. And then the person will turn a blind eye, pun intended, to the legislative will of Allah and still take the statement of the person that they were looking up to, right? This is where we get into a negative connotation, and we get into a downturn, right? A down spiral, right? And we don't have, I don't think we have time to go into the depths that I would like to go into, because now we cross over into the utility of the madahib, of the approaches to law. And many people end up blind following a madhab, an approach to law, without really understanding the functionality of the approach to law, what it is and how you use it. We'll say this briefly. Sometimes people will say, well, that's just the madhab, but the verse says this, but the hadith says this, but the understanding is this. Okay, well, that approach to law, that madhab, what do you think that is? that approach to law is utilizing the legislative will of Allah, is utilizing the Quran, is utilizing the Sunnah, is utilizing the understanding and the application of the ancients in order to come to that conclusion, is utilizing the subsidiary fields of knowledge of Islam in order to arrive as close as possible to what Allah intended by what he said and what the Messenger of Allah intended by what he said. That's what it is. But at the same time, so we can understand what an approach to law actually is. Its purpose is to bring an individual from the point of not being ignorant, of not having any knowledge of the law of Islam and the broader faith and practice of Islam, to a level of where you are independently able to interact with the legislative will of Allah and appropriately interact with the legislative will of Allah, with the evidences of Allah, right? The madhab, the approach to law, provides the proper training to be able to do that appropriately and effectively. The same way that we go to school. There's elementary school, there's middle school, there's high school, there's university, right? And then there's graduate level studies. The approaches to law do this. It's law school. That's what it is. It's law school. And you are becoming a lawyer, you're becoming a judge, you're becoming, this is what that is, right? We're stating this in English with the Arabic on purpose so that we can understand what's going on here, right? This is what a faqih is, a jurist, is a lawyer, right? This is what a qadi is, a judge, right? When you seek out a fatwa, we call it an edict. You're seeking out a legal opinion. The same way that you'll go to a lawyer to get a legal opinion from that lawyer, okay? That legal opinion that you're getting from that lawyer in this field of expertise, he's letting you know, well, this is what the law is, and based on your situation, this is what I believe you should be doing. You're not necessarily bound to that, though. That's legal opinion, right? Now, when the judge comes, the lawyers present their legal opinions to the judge. And then the judge will then determine which one of these legal opinions are closer to the truth and most appropriate for this scenario. And now it becomes binding upon those in that scenario to actually practice it. This is how that works, right? So the person that is going through this training. The problem here with the blind following piece is that many people will ascribe themselves to an approach to law, whether they realize they are or not, right? Whether they realize they are or not, because sometimes we say we're following the Quran and the Sunnah, we're following the understanding of the Salaf, and you are, but no question, you are also following an approach to law. Yes, you are, right? So many people without being amongst that, being in this field of training, ascribe themselves to an approach to law without knowing the approach to law. And it's just blind following. And you end up misapplying things and misunderstanding things, right? We'll give you one example, and then we'll stop here. And in this example, it brings about differing and bickering and undue hatred, and it impacts our fellowship for one another. And it shouldn't. One small example. When we're standing in rank in prayer, it is not uncommon for some of our brothers and sisters that may be from a certain area of the world, that when you stand in rank along with them, that they will step away from you in the rank of the prayer, sometimes a distance of four fingers, right? Let's say. And they believe that is the right thing to do. You take it personal, almost. Why the brother don't want to stand next to me in the rank? Why he not closing the gaps? Why da-da-da-da? You think like that, right? However, this is because this person is ascribing to an approach to law, right? In their minds, but they don't have proper training in their approach to law. So when you look at the actual approach to law itself, and you'll find that the approach to law wasn't speaking about the obligatory prayer and standing away from your brother or sister in the obligatory prayer. That wasn't what it was talking about. And it did not come from the founder of the approach to law, but rather one of the scholars who ascribes to the approach to law was trained in that approach to law. And the scenario he was talking about was if you have two Muslims praying near one another and they're praying two different voluntary prayers, then how far should they be from one another to distinguish the two different voluntary prayers that they're praying, right? But that's what training in the approach to law, in the madhab. But others who have nothing to do with that, now they're just blind following. They don't understand the context and application. Now they bring that into the obligatory prayer. And now there's a gap in the rank. And now there's some agitation right between the brothers and the sisters, and it brings about division.
No, barakallahu feek, mashallah. I'm gonna put one more question up here for you guys, and then just remember whatever ones we didn't get to catch to, inshallah ta'ala. Hopefully we'll be able to catch it next week or put it into the Fajr Club Q&A where we can elaborate on it even more. Jazakallah khairan for that, brother Aqil. No, for those who don't know, you see already that issue itself is like a class in and of itself. Alhamdulillah. And our brother did good by just touching on some of the surface of it, man, and it's deep, inshallah ta'ala. So I'm going to use this next one. I think it's from the brother Abdul Qadir.
Assalamu alaikum. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. And also to our brother Chaplain Antigua, wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Would you say that part of our problem as converts in the West is not being around a lot of examples of people at the higher stage? Their presence would mitigate a lot of consequences of people being put into positions who, frankly, are not most suitable for them. Our culture has been one of being attracted to charismatic figures or strong figures versus the knowledgeable, wise, or truly pious. And since I took the front of the first question, and I've read the question for you, I offer this question firstly to my brother Nafis, and I'll dovetail you. May Allah bless you.
No. Ayub, you got to be quiet, Ayub.
May Allah preserve Ayub.
No. All right. Inshallah ta'ala, I just don't want the family is just waking up over here. So I just feel embarrassed if, y'all got to hear all that crazy commotion in the background.
It's organic. We natural.
Right? But anyway, just to answer some of the questions, just the beginning for me, I mean, I'm not going to go in detail as our brother Aqil Ingram here. Yes, we should have, and I just want to make this clear. If we can have scholars of this caliber who both has, as Aqil so eloquently put it for us, who both have scholarship and righteousness embodied together, right? They have scholarship and righteousness embodied together, whereas though they can be a qudwa, an example for us, then we should utilize that to help us out. But unfortunately, in the West, brothers and sisters, there are people who have scholarship, and they may or may not have righteousness, and they may or may not be of the pedigree of some of the scholars that we read their works. They might not be of that level, but they still have something they can contribute, far as scholarship. You understand? They still can contribute some level of academic and some level of mannerisms, some etiquettes. Okay, and also we have to realize again, just going to a little bit what he's saying here, help and far as the charismatic figures or strong figures versus the knowledgeable. I want to make something clear. You have to understand that in the West, you still need people who can relate to people. You understand? A lot of the scholars over there in the East, they're going to tell you, go back to your people, your respective land, and teach them because of what? One of the things you do have is that you what? You know them. You are from them. And it's good to have someone from you, as we have many ayats in the Quran where Allah Jalla wa'ala talks about that very point about the Prophet ﷺ being from amongst them. You understand, and showing you that. So that's important to understand. Having people from us sometimes will help out. It will help out tremendously because they understand us. They understand our culture. They understand the way we were raised. They understand the things that we're going through, what we're facing. So if they get the proper knowledge, the proper training, you understand the proper scholarship and righteousness, they will be able to give it to us the way that we would need, and it will be relatable for us. So I think instead of just worrying about getting people sometimes who's not from us, uh, to fill that slot, I think that would become pragmatic a little bit because it might be a barrier between them and the people they're talking to. So I'm just thinking that. And also I just wanted to mention here another thing that yes, it's important that we understand. Oh, the video here, okay. It's important that we understand that, inshallah ta'ala, that we have to be mindful that we want things to change. But changing is always going to be an individual path, then it's going to be a collective one. And most people think that it's a collective one versus an individual one. And that's not how Islam actually teaches us. It teaches us the opposite of it. The collective path has a way, yes, it does. But the individual path is that we each are responsible to what? To a certain degree to fear Allah Jalla wa'ala. We are each are responsible to a certain degree to learn about Allah. Right? We are responsible to carry out what Allah subhanahu obligated upon us. Which in turns, if we do that, internalizing that, we can begin. So this is why you find some of the, and Aqil can help me out here. You find some of the athars in the past where they will make dua again for the leader, right? You'll find them making dua for the leader, that the leader's righteous, this, that. But then you'll also find statements on the contrary, where Ali ibn Abi Talib mentioned to his subjects that we were the subjects of such and such Abu Bakr and Umar and so forth, right? And they had, such and such for their leaders, just flipping it right back on them. So if you have a problem with the leadership here, as Ali was explaining to them, then look at the people that we had. Look who are our subjects now. So we have to be honest with ourselves to a certain degree. We ain't going to be able to just get righteous because we bring over or migrated these people here. No, we got to work on what we have. We really have to work on what we have. And we got to be honest with ourselves. If you're not a studious person, you don't have no zeal to really go further in scholarship, you don't have no zeal to go further in those certain things, you know yourself, then this is the person you're working with and you got to make dua for that person. Inshallah ta'ala. Find ways or means that person can learn because that person has a zeal that Allah placed in them to do that. You know what I'm saying? A lot of people say, I want to memorize Quran, but haven't begin to memorize nothing. You understand? They haven't took the time out to memorize anything, but they keep telling you, I want to memorize Quran. Okay, then where's your work for it? Or I'm going to be such and such. Well, where's your work for it? And they haven't done it. But the brother that you keep saying, he's just in front of me. He's this, and that. He had that zeal, but he's still going through those stages that Aqil was telling you about. The raw data stage, without the ethic, without the understanding, moving to the second stage, without the wisdom. So he needs help. And the way he's going to get our help is we make abundance of dua and we try to teach that person, inshallah ta'ala. Last but not least, I just want to mention one last thing and then we're done. Q&A, brothers and sisters. Please take these questions to the Fajr Club Q&A. There was some spam that was placed in there. I know brother Aqil, if he can get to it, he can probably remove those people who have put the spam in there. But we're not going to make up a new group for it. So what we'll do is we're going to prep those individuals out who put the spam in there. I think some stuff we just can't get around, and we just move them out. Take those numbers and move them out. But please interact on the Fajr Club situation.
And I'm gonna, before we close, I know we're coming up on time. I just want to just dovetail your point very briefly and make three tight points.
No, go ahead.
Firstly, in speaking to our dear brother Sheikh Abdul Qadir's question, our Lord states, وَلَقَدْ بَعَثْنَا فِي كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولًا أَنِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَاجْتَنِبُوا الطَّاغُوتَ. And certainly we have sent to every nation a messenger proclaiming to worship Allah alone and abstain from worshiping the creation. We understand from this that Allah sent to every nation a prophet and messenger that were from their people, that understood them and could relate to them. Likewise, all of us as Muslims throughout the world, we should have people that we can understand and relate to them in our spiritual growth track and in our academic religious track. Point number two, the Prophet ﷺ stated, Al-baraka ma'a kabirihim. The blessing is with the seniors amongst them. And this is really, I believe, the point that Sheikh Abdul Qadir was mentioning. And the blessing being with the seniors amongst them, this means in knowledge as well as in life experience. That those that have knowledge, they have a degree of blessing that we should seek out. And these that have that knowledge, as Manawi mentions, commenting on this hadith, that those that have the knowledge, sometimes they may not have the age, but because of that knowledge, we still offer a degree of reverence, right? Now, along with this, there are those who have wisdom, they have life experience, and they may not have knowledge. That also has its reverence. And then there are those that have both. They have the knowledge, they have piety, and they have life experience. And this is the highest level of those that are senior amongst us, and we would give them the most degree of reverence. That was the second point. The third and the last point I want to make here is that we should make a distinction in the stage of zeal between knowledge and righteousness. It is not a condition of righteousness that you have to be a talib ilm, that you have to be a disciple of knowledge. It is not a condition of righteousness that you have to have some level of knowledge as such, right? No, but anyone that is striving to be a practicing Muslim in the opening stages of your practice or in the opening stages of excelling your practice, you may have this zeal as well, even if you are not on the path of knowledge, right? So we just felt that we should make that distinction, and we apologize for being lengthy. May Allah reward you.
Yeah, barakallahu feek, Sheikh. Inshallah ta'ala, go head over to Fajr Club. We apologize again on behalf of our other co-host, Dr. Baker. He will be with us next week, inshallah ta'ala. Thank you all for contributing to your questions. May Allah Jalla wa'ala reward you, brothers and sisters who tuned in. And thank Brother Aqil for parting with us his wisdom, his knowledge, inshallah ta'ala. And hopefully Allah Jalla wa'ala forgive us for anything that we said incorrect during this talk. And like I said, we'd like to continue to build, inshallah. This is your brother and host, Nafis Abu Zaid.
This is your brother, Aqil Ingram.
Naam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.